Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Scared to Dance podcast with me, your host, Paul Richards. Over the course of this series, I'll be talking to some of my favourite people about their musical passions past and present. These include people who have DJed our club night, as well as those who have curated our film nights. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Stuart Murdoch from Belle and Sebastian down the line. Stuart formed Belle and Sebastian in Glasgow in 1996 at Stowe College, and the band soon released their debut album Tigermilk. Following the critically acclaimed If You're Feeling Sinister, the band won Best Newcomer at the 99 Brit Awards after release of their third album, The Boy with the Arab Strap. The band have released 12 studio albums to date, culminating in the back-to-back releases of A Bit of Previous and Late Developers. His latest book, Nobody's Empire, was released in 2024. Welcome to the show, Stuart Murdoch.
Hello. Hi, nice to be here.
Stuart, we last talked when I interviewed you for the 10th anniversary of your film God Help the Girl at the Glasgow Film Theatre. What was that experience for you like after such a long time?
It was nice because I hadn't thought about it for so long. You know, when I was actually making the film, I was completely submerged in it, and then just to actually show it. But then, you know, it was nice, and we had a Q&A, and we took some people out afterwards and showed them some of the locations. I remember it was pouring with rain, but it was still lots of people following me around the sort of West End. And it was amazing how compressed, how close together all the locations actually were when we did the little walking tour. And then right at the end, I just bade everybody farewell and walked in a different direction and left them down by the Kelvin River to find their own way home. But there was something really, it felt, because that was the end of the Bully weekend that we had done. And it felt like a really nice way to finish the weekend.
I remember you saying during the Q&A, it was a bit like looking back at an old diary. Is making another film something you would like to do in the future?
The little flashes that I've had in the past few years, the one thing about God Help the Girl is that it took a long time, and I felt I learned a lot. It took a long time to get to the place where we were making the film, but the actual making of the film was like a car crash. It was so fast. And I was nothing except an inexperienced director. And so I do feel that if I was involved in another movie, that I would have so much more experience. And so, you know, you only learn how to do a thing by doing it. And you get better at it. You know, it's like making our first record, and then we got better. So I think maybe I wouldn't be in such a rush to direct next time, but I certainly would maybe like to, write another screenplay, work on more music, and, be involved in movies in some way.
Yeah, and you've had that stimulation outside of the band, and you've now written your debut novel, Nobody's Empire, which is loosely based on your own experiences. Can you give us an outline of the book?
So Nobody's Empire is a snapshot. I mean, we were chatting beforehand, and you were saying, well, it's not really autobiographical. Well, it actually is. It centers around a guy called Stephen, who's very like me. And what happens to Stephen is really what happened to me. And, there's other characters, and they're like other people I knew. But I chose to write it with changing names because I wanted to write a story, and I didn't want to be encumbered by the truth. I didn't want to be encumbered by what actually happened. So it just was easier for me to write it in that sort of autofiction way. And the action all happens about more than 30 years ago now. It all starts in Glasgow in 1991, where Stephen has just got out of hospital, and he's had a torrid couple of years with chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, just getting worse and ending up in hospital, and his life completely changing. So the novel starts with him kind of at the bottom, sort of spewed out from the hospital. And it's like, okay, life starting over again, a complete blank slate. Where do I go from here? I don't have any friends. I don't have any energy. And that's where the book starts. But he gets a friend, Carrie, who also has chronic fatigue syndrome, and they form and then he has another friend, Richard, who ends up getting a flat, and they move back to Glasgow. And it's just the story of the three of them and how they survive and try to make a new life for themselves, contending with illness.
So in that period between the late 80s and early 90s, you were suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome. What would have been the albums you were listening to at the time? Did you find that helpful in terms of dealing with your condition?
Yes, definitely, completely. What actually happened in a music sense was that 90% of what I was listening to, maybe even 95 or 99% of what I was listening to before fell away. In the 80s, I was a huge consumer of music, and I was, I was a professional consumer of music because I was playing records out on a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So I was playing all the new stuff, indie stuff, all, a great mixture of hip hop and house. But when I got ill, my DJing commitments were the first thing I gave up. And, and I didn't listen to music for, especially it was about a year where I was so unwell that I just couldn't bear it. It was too stimulating, and also it was too painful to, I just couldn't listen to music. And it's documented in the book. There's a moment where Stephen's in hospital and he's been in there for about a week, and he's starting to eat again because he lost lots of weight, and he has his Walkman with him, and he puts on one song, "Can't Be Sure" by the Sundays, and that's the first song that he's listened to for so long. And it's the new Genesis. It's like ground zero. And he could only listen to that song, and then maybe a week later he puts on the Cocteau Twins and listen to one of their records. And so it's almost like and this did actually happen to me. The years went on, 91 into 92 into 93. I was very fussy about what I would listen to, and it had to be music that was a comfort, but also music that completely engaged me. I wasn't doing anything else. This was not music to wash the dishes to, or this was not music to run to, or work to, the things I used to do. So, and that's why Felt became, well, it seemed obvious to me that Felt would become my main group. But there was something about their music that I found completely absorbing, and so that they became the group I listened to most.
That's really interesting. You said it was quite painful listening to music at the time. Do you think that psychologically for you, that was a way of dealing with what was going on at the time in terms of moving on with your life, as a kind of not new and old Stuart Murdoch, but of a turning of a page?
Oh, well, it absolutely was. I mean, it was old and new. It was a complete new start. It was a complete new me. It was the main fulcrum of my life when everything changed, and so there was a lot of quietness, a lot of sort of emptiness, and the reason partly that music was so painful, just because I could my system psychologically and physiologically couldn't abide couldn't abide the sort of music that I used to listen to. I didn't really listen to the Pixies or Sonic Youth so much, which I used to love, because I was just going slower. And so yeah, I guess it was just more gentle, easier music that I wanted to listen to. But saying that, though, gentle isn't always easier. I mean, I did listen to, I was listening to Beethoven as well, which is not easy music sometimes, like, or Bartok or something, where, classical stuff, but it's engaging and lovely.
So going back to early in your life, I was reading that you were growing up in Ayr and your parents made you learn the piano. What age would you have been? Can you remember the first songs you would have heard, or the first album you bought? Would that have been something that your, a sibling would introduce you to?
So super early on, we had the radio. So that was really that was the main thing. I remember my sister was into the Osmonds. This was like way back, in the early 70s. She was in the Osmonds fan club, and me and my brother, we thought that was cool, and she would get magazines, and we'd look at the magazines, we'd laugh at all the people. We used to call them the groovy groups, because it was just like, it just seemed to be page after page of like groups, like people like Deep Purple, and with who had really kind of long hair, and sort of the whole hippie vibe. Yeah, my parents were into music, but not, sort of classical, and kind of maybe a bit of easy listening, or my mom just loved musicals. She just used to love watching musicals, and all that stuff. Obviously, that stuff was at that age you absorb everything. We had a swing in our back garden, and I used to sit in the swing, and I used to sing down the top 10 records when I was 5 or 6, because I know that. I mean, I must have been that young because the swing was in the house in Glasgow, and we moved when I was 6. And so I had a keen enough musical sense that I could remember bits of enough of the top 10. And funnily enough, I thought that that's what everybody did. Music was so pervasive, at least, the charts were so pervasive. You had Top of the Pops and you had the radio. So you'd hear a lot of music, even though at that point, you didn't have that much agency over what you could listen to.
So what would have been the first album that you bought for yourself? Was there a particular band or a musician that you fell in love with?
Well, the funny thing is that I'm sure if you ask various people what their first album was, they would tend to, think, oh, okay, well, what was the first cool record that I bought, and all. But in actual fact, the very first record that I bought was by Pinky and Perky. Little pigs that sang in high-pitched voices. And I got it at a Scout jumble sale. I've told this stuff to a couple of podcasts that in America, and you've always got to explain Pinky and Perky, and then you've got the concept of a Scout jumble sale. So it's great that I don't have to talk about this stuff. So 50 pence, Pinky and Perky's Hit Parade Volume 2, but it was quickly followed up. I don't think it was the same Scout jumble sale. I think it was the one 6 months later. It shows you my music development, because then I picked up Bridge Over Troubled Water with Simon and Garfunkel, and just picked it out randomly, thought this looks good. And of course, I never really stopped listening to that ever.
Yeah, so I'm a huge Simon and Garfunkel fan. I mean, their greatest hits is probably the one piece of vinyl I'd save if my flat was burning down. So just going back to Nobody's Empire, you became a DJ at the University of Glasgow, and in the book, the character is planning his DJ set. How fun was that, and do you miss it?
Yeah, for quite a while afterwards, you get this feeling on a Friday or Saturday night, like, what am I doing here? Why am I not thinking about, what you're playing? It was really all pervasive. You would know yourself, like if you're preparing a night, and, we'd start first thing in the morning. Okay, well, what shops am I going to go to? What do I need? What gaps in my knowledge do I need to plug? What sessions do I need to tape off, peel? I mean, I used to work in like peel sessions as well, like playing off cassette, which was, a little bit of a risky business when you're actually DJing to a club full of people. But it was the right sort of people. So they sort of dug it, they dug the fact that this version of 24-hour Party People was from Peel. Yeah, I was really serious about it, and I mean, I remember going out for my Saturday afternoon run and then always working through what I was going to play on the evening.
When Belle and Sebastian initially took off around 1996, who were the bands you were listening to? How did you feel about the contemporary bands at the time, or did the whole Britpop scene slightly pass you by?
Yeah, definitely. My obsessive stage was past, but I had a few exceptions. I thought as soon as I heard the Tindersticks, this is when I was getting an inkling of what kind of music I really wanted to make. And then suddenly those guys came along and I thought, fuck it. That was the first time I got really envious, because, I thought they were amazing. And I just thought that's kind of what I want to get into. And I think it was quite an original sound at the time. I just, the early Tindersticks singles and that first LP, I thought Stereolab were terrific. I remember hearing their second single and just thinking, wow, that's amazing. And so I remember going to see them live. And then there was Pulp. There was, you've got to give Pulp their due, because I mean, I still was into pop. So, by the 90s, I knew I wanted to do it myself. But I remember going to see Pulp. I was standing at the back. This was still, it was kind of in the days where I was like, back in the 80s, I would be right up the front. So I was sort of standing at the back thinking, okay, yeah, this, I like their singles. Let's see what they got. And then they came on, and then I found myself, I was like I kind of fought my way to the front. I thought, this is amazing. So, so it was quite a rare, by this stage for me, I was like, okay, I got to get the full experience here. So I managed to get right down the front. And then Jarvis started talking to the audience in this conversational way where it felt like he was actually having a conversation with the audience. He was actually listening to what people were saying, listening to comments that you couldn't quite hear, but he was sort of filling in for the people. So it was, he had this skill that I'd never experienced before, because the bands that, Dinosaur, the Mary Chain, nobody had that personality. Nobody had that ability to engage with the audience and to seem interested enough to feel like the audience were real people to be reckoned with, rather than just punters to be sang at. I thought that was terrific. I think that was kind of influential for me to see the way that Jarvis did that. Also, I really liked the first Denim record when that came out in 91 or whenever it was. It was completely different from Felt. It was like the Lawrence reinvented himself and went and did this pop record. But there was a lot of great stuff about that record. I remember dancing to that record, that track Middle of the Road. And there's a line, he's dissing all this music, all these sacred cows, everything from Aretha Franklin to early Dylan, and just saying, it's not for me. I just like the middle of the road. I like pop music, and it's your music. It's your right to choose. It's your rock and roll. I thought that's amazing.
Yeah, so what have those bands been an influence when you're writing those early Belle and Sebastian songs that became Tigermilk and If You're Feeling Sinister?
At that point when you're writing, you sort of you really do, and this sounds like insolence and hubris and everything, but you put your fucking influences behind you and you get on with your job. You really do. You have to do that. You have to feel, what we're doing something new here, or I'm doing something new. You work from isolation and you've got a chip on your shoulder and you're trying to prove yourself. Because I've been trying to get this together for years. And, so I was as serious as you could possibly get. It was probably no fun to be around. I was just so serious because I've been, really writing a lot of music, and I thought, this is my turn. I took one idea into the Tigermilk sessions, and that was Rattlesnakes by Lloyd Cole. I think that was the only little benchmark that I had, just in the back of my mind. I just thought Rattlesnakes, but that it didn't really. I didn't think Rattlesnakes every day. I just thought, wouldn't it be great to make a debut album as great as Rattlesnakes? That's all I thought. That was kind of like a kind of benchmark or something to aim at. But then again, you put it to one side, and then you sort of get on with it. But I know there was I think probably the Left Bank was a big influence. Love was a big influence. Love and Spoonful, those more slightly groovy West Coast, lighter, the Birds, that sort of thing were probably, these were really, it's almost like the blood in your veins that was on, Deep Background. And because I did have this, notion of, okay, want to do pop music, but I want to do it with the cello as important as the guitar, and the harpsichords is as important as the drums, and there's the Tinder Sticks again, that they probably, kicked that whole thing off for me.
You mentioned the Tinder Sticks and Pulp as contemporaries that you absolutely loved at the time, but do you feel that after the first two albums came out that you were part of something, or that you were these complete outsiders looking in?
We weren't even part of something in Glasgow. I mean, especially in Glasgow, it was like, get to fuck. I mean, it's funny because Edwin Collins said a funny thing the other day. He said, somebody pointed out that he'd said something rather nasty about another band back in 1981 or something. And he said, well, that's what people did. That was what the scene was like back then. It was catty, it was backbiting, and everybody was looking over their shoulders. And so I'm not saying it was like that so much in Glasgow. I just felt I was completely isolated. I do tell a story sometimes where, people got so used to me asking them to be in my band that they would cross the street. I saw like hipsters, cool people make a body swerve in Byres Road and crossing the street because they thought, this guy's going to fucking ask me to be in his band again. it was that ridiculous, and I remember being up at the art school and chatting to somebody, and they said, well, what you up to? And I said, well, I'm trying to get a band together. And this person I can't remember who it was just like, why would you do that? There's too many bands. Why would you do that? Look, I mean, are you going to be as good as the Small Faces? So fucking forget it, Who do you think you are? Why do you think that a wee prick from Glasgow can do anything? So that was the prevailing attitude. And the nice thing about the Bells, when you look back in it now, I mean, we're fucking misfits. When you see the ragtag bunch that got together to do this college project, this school project, I mean, it's a brilliant origin story, because none of those guys were in the cool set. We were complete ragtag, and I loved that. I loved it. It was, instead of me having to chase people, Belle and Sebastian were actually the first 7 people through the door. It was the first 7 people that I ran into when I was asked by Stowe College to make a record.
Can you remember what your expectations were at the beginning? Did you have any grand plans, or was it, let's just make an album?
By this point, I didn't think it could be a group that would be a going concern. I just want to make a record. That's all I wanted to do. That's all I had the provision in my mind to do. I was still, weak with ME, so I was so limited. But I thought I could make a record. I thought I could control the whole thing, and these guys would come in, and so that was it. Yeah, we managed that, but it surprised me that after we did that, we were kind of like, I think me and Chris and Isabel, you went on a drive to the countryside like the day after Tigermilk. They were kind of like, okay, so what's happening? What's next? And I was like, I don't know. But it was kind of great, because we did have a sense. Most of us, particularly those guys and me, who had the sense we'd actually done something that was completely surprising. Chris never thought, at this point, never thought he would have made a record, and Isabel was, at that point, she was delighted to be in the studio. At that point, Jackson was this sort of unknown factor, because he was the one thing I couldn't really get a handle on. I didn't really know how he did what he did, or it was terrific. That was the great thing about his guitar. He just seemed to be able to pick it up, and it sounded like a full meal. It sounded like a band all on its own. And so Jackson was the kind of the X factor on Tigermilk, and where everybody we placed everything else around that. And so, but with Sinister, I wanted to do. I was getting a little bit more ambitious. Wanted to make more use of the cello, violin, and trumpet arrangements. Wanted them to be a little bit more considered. I think on Tigermilk we sort of recorded the 4. I think we recorded the 4 guys, and then maybe added some, strings afterwards. I wrote all the songs for Sinister in a really short period of time. I mean, the band sort of really only got together at the start of '96. We recorded Tigermilk in March, but I'd started writing the songs for Sinister around about, actually in probably February. I wrote Fox and the Snow and Stars, the Track and Field, the same day, I think. And I wrote those songs a really short period of time. The last song I wrote was Judy and the Dream of Horses, which is more like in the spring. And so we rehearsed a little bit more. I rehearsed I remember rehearsing with Isabel on her own, and maybe Chris on his own for a bit, and thinking about the parts a bit more. But instead of Rattlesnakes as I guess my benchmark for Sinister was Tapestry and Court and Spark. That was I had 2 little benchmarks. And of course, those LPs were recorded by seasoned artists with the best session musicians, with careful production. There was a lot. There's obviously so much experience and know-how went into the making of those records, and so it was a high thing to aim for, and we fell short. But And the falling short was all in my department, because I had this overarching sense that I had to do everything quickly. If I didn't do everything quickly, they were going to stop me. I've been waiting for this moment for so long. I didn't want to wrest any control. Sinister was at the height of my tunnel vision, and just wanted to get it done. And I felt that if I didn't do it quickly, because I felt already we felt this pressure, because at this point we actually had a record label called Jeepster. Those guys were like, they kept phoning up on the first day and said, "Oh, how many reels of tapes have you used?" We can't afford that much tape. And I already felt this pressure. It was all the pressure was on me, obviously. And I was just thinking, oh, fuck off, just let me get on with it. That was the vibe around Sinister. And of course you got the group where they weren't just marionettes. They were living people, and they had their own opinions. And suddenly, during the course of the year, the personality of this band started to appear. And by the end of the year, everything was ripped up. I mean, the kind of idea that I had of a group, of it being this controlled thing, this baroque thing, was completely torn to shreds by the next by the next recording session.
So that mean by the time of recording The Boy the Arab Strap, you're leaving this tunnel vision and things are becoming slightly more panoramic?
Well, it wasn't Arab Strap. It was the same year. It was 1996. We'd done Sinister, and we were back with an album's worth of stuff at the end of the year, ready to record again. But this time we said to each other, let's do singles. And so we had, like I said, we had an album's worth of stuff, but we said, let's do singles, let's do EPs. That's what we were aiming for. But in a sense, it was just like recording an album. We had the same group of songs, but we did everything. It was completely different. It was only like 4 months after we'd recorded Sinister. I think the first thing that happened was that Isabel was kind of pissed off with me by that point, just generally. And she, but in a healthy way, because, this guy's like, suddenly this guy that she didn't know 12 months ago was having all this sort of power over her life. Like, fuck this. And, and Stuart probably felt the same. And, so she picked up the bass guitar. Stuart was quite happy about that, read his book, and everybody had to move one instrument round. and and I was like, well, there you go. There's the Belle and Sebastian blueprint. It's fucked. It's gone forever. And that was when we record. I think it was either Lazy Line Painter Jane. Isabel played. I think she played the bass on Lazy Line Painter Jane, and also that recording was done not in a recording studio. We decided to record in the church hall where I lived, because we were a little bit disappointed in the sound of Sinister. It didn't sound like Tapestry. I mean, I know a lot of people love that LP, and it's super. I think it's a really strong set of songs, but it's quite lightweight sounding, and that's fine. But you're always, when you're in a band, you're always trying to make something better. You're trying to make something good. So that set us off on this musical adventure, and it really, we never looked back from that point.
So in 1999, you won a Brit Award. What was that like? Suddenly you're going from being in a band who are, don't even bother, you're not the small faces, to being known nationally and then later on internationally.
I had some moments where this group could be great, or wow, we're actually doing it. But it wasn't the Brits moment. I mean, even just the first moment that Mark and Lard played the state I'm in on, I mean, that was a huge moment. But the Brits didn't mean anything to me in that sense. I didn't watch the Brits. I didn't care about the Brits. I didn't go to the Brits. It became mildly amusing. It was sort of, we were in the studio, we were still recording, and it was only Richard and Mick that went down. And when we won the thing, there was a I remember going to the newsagent that night with Chris at midnight to get the next morning's newspaper to read about the Brits. And we were the headline. And they accused us of cheating. So that and I know that might seem like a joke now, but at the time, this felt like typical. We were just like, we were a Scottish band working hard, just putting out records. And the one time that we put our head above the parapet and won an award, the Sun newspaper, we were on the front of the Sun and it said, Brits band, it's Scottish band in Brits fix, shocker. And me and Chris were like, at that point, there was this before the internet, we felt like we were under siege. That obviously the press was now coming to Glasgow to try and find out what the story was. And we were in a bunker in the studio, and we were very febrile. We were ready for a fight.
I remember getting into Belle and Sebastian at university when friends let me dig Catastrophe Waitress and The Life of Pursuit on CD. How do you look back on those two albums, and what was it like working with Trevor Horn?
Yeah, that was great. It was happy days. This is real happy days because it was kind of the Bells Mark too. The first 5 years of the group was, Stuart left and Isabel, she left before Catastrophe Waitress, and Bob had come in, and because we'd have that 1999 2000 was rough, and my health was poor, and so I didn't really know whether the group was going to go on. And Bob came in, and and the people that were there had to decide, but at least it was the people that really wanted to do it that were left. And so suddenly it felt easier. It just felt lighter. It was just like, no, this is great. We can actually, we can carry on. We can do another record. And the great thing about doing a record with Trevor and then doing a couple of records with Tony was, for me personally, was that I didn't physically have to do so much. I know that might seem like a small thing or a weird thing, but up to this point, I was always co-producing and mixing with Tony Dugan back in Glasgow. Tony was great. He did a terrific job, and we had a lot of fun and everything. But it was so nice to just leave that and actually step into Trevor's world, where Trevor was in charge. It was the pressure was on Trevor, and I could actually focus on singing and writing, and a bit of arrangement, but not on production. And so then we had a great old fucking time. I mean, it was like the 2000s were just amazing. And a lot of people who know anything about Belle and Sebastian, if they know something at all, will probably think about those early days, and and think, oh well, the 2000s, that's when they lost it. Well, we didn't. We were just different, and we were having a great old time, and we were still super serious about the music. We actually got more ambitious in a sense, and I think those records are quite robust.
With that record, did it come out the way you were expecting, or did Trevor Horn have a big input as the producer?
I think actually Trevor, we expected Trevor maybe to chop and shape us a little bit more than he did, but I think he was just really happy to get with a working band. I mean, his background was, he used to be in a band called Yes. He was in Buggles, but he was also in Yes. He was a working musician, so he really appreciated bands and guiding bands, and maybe hadn't done so much of that recently, especially throughout all the 80s, where you're putting stuff together for the bands. And so we could play, and he was happy with that. He just guided us. He didn't really, I mean, there was one track in particular called Stay Loose, where we thought we were going to get the whole Art of Noise treatment. We really thought he was going to, break it down and start again. And actually, that was the song that he cared for least. It was weird because we thought, well, this is right up Trevor's Strasser. He's going to love working on this. And he sort of tolerated it. And he said, we were like determined it was going in the record. And he was like, yeah, okay. If you feel that strongly about it. But But we had a great time with Trevor, and he just allowed us to realize our kind of pop and rock ambitions. I think the by that stage the urges that were coming through from different people in the group were stronger, and we went with those. We weren't trying to create a tight baroque sound or anything like that. We just, I mean, I remember, like, Cuckoo, for me, I'm a Cuckoo. That song, when I got into my head, was like a tiger. It just kept, I couldn't get rid of it. It was just going round and round all the time. And beforehand, I would always, write songs on the guitar, songs on the piano, take them into the group. Whereas this Cuckoo was just, it was like a radio switching on. I couldn't get rid of it. So that was fun.
You say you see that period of Belle and Sebastian as Mark II. Do you see a Mark III?
Funnily enough, not really. I think it's the present band is pretty much a continuation from the year 2000. It can't be underestimated what the sort of personalities in the group, the way that we consider each other. It's like a family. And I think from that point on, that's when that started. I have very fond memories of Stuart and Isabel, and of that being, that's definitely when the family started. But those guys grew up and moved away, and then the rest of us hunkered down. But yeah, it really, from that point, the other key thing was that we became a touring group, and we were never a touring group before, and so we were a viable touring group, and that became half of the experience, and is to this present day. I mean, I never thought we'd be a touring group, but we took it up in 2000, and then we've never left it.
And the band toured Europe and America and Australia last year. Do you get time to go to record stores and hang out and find out what's happening in those places?
Yeah, you get a little bit of time, and everybody does different things. I'm not the record store guys are Dave and Bob and Chris and Stevie, in that order. That's what they do. They still manage to. It's amazing to me that they manage to find the time. I'm not interested at all. I'm not interested in walking into a record store. I would prefer to go for a bike ride or find the local Buddhist center.
Are there any touring or album plans of Belle and Sebastian this year, or are you waiting for 2026?
Yeah, 2026 is 30 years actually of the group, and I know the whole anniversary deal is somewhat mindless, but we haven't actually done the anniversary thing. Once we did it, we played at the Albert Hall. We did Tigermilk Sinister 10 years ago. So we're actually we're going to play some anniversary shows. We're going to mark the occasion with a sort of larger tour.
And will there be any new material next year, or will there be something a little bit further down the line? Because the last two albums, A Bit Previous and Late Developers, they came out quite close together.
Yeah, actually not, because what would usually happen is that we would be doing that now, and we're not. And we're conspicuously not. We're actually giving the it's almost like leaving a field fallow for a year. Like, we're missing it out in the cycle, and people are doing other things, and I've been supporting my book and stuff like that. So we had a little bit. We've given the recording a break for a year or so.
And have you considered writing more? Was the novel something that sparked the feeling of wanting you to write another book?
Personally speaking, I'm always working on something. I think I was working up until the point where the book came out. I was working on the book, thinking about the book, but now that the book is out, then I have this space in my head for creativity, and so I started working on writing other songs, but more spiritual music. Songs that could be hymns. I always love hymns, and I always think, I want to write a few classic hymns, especially over Christmas. I was writing some songs. Yeah.
Okay, and is that something that would come under Belle and Sebastian, or something that would come under your own name?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I don't know. I think I might get together with a choir at some point and record them or something.
You mentioned earlier the Glasgow Weekender, where you kindly asked me to come and DJ, and it was a really fantastic lineup with CMAC, Came Obscura, Disco, and the Chords all playing. How does that come together? Was the lineup chosen by yourself and the band, or are there other people involved?
We've done that sort of thing in the past. Obviously, we had the Bowley Weekender back in '99, so that was the blueprint for future Bowleys. So yeah, that was a collection of people that we were really excited to play with, and who really wanted to come and be part of that Weekender. It was a really nice lineup. I think everybody had a good time. But I do notice, like, I'm funny, just in my Facebook feed today, that I noticed there's a festival called Shine On, and it's doing Butlins this year, and it's the Mary Chain and a bunch of other things in it. I'm just thinking, wow, that just looks like the, but the bowl, it's just basically the Bowley sort of festival, but with the different bands.
Yeah, and Bowley became ATP, which I don't think a lot of people realise that Belle and Sebastian started that.
Yeah, we kind of started. I mean, it wasn't the obviously the idea of the Weekender was like the Soul Weekenders and in the past, but the notion of the boutique festival where you'd get a bunch of bands together and actually stay in chalets rather than tents, and then show films and talk about music and all that sort of stuff. I think we definitely created that sort of blueprint.
And is there an album from the past 12 months that you would recommend? Is there something that's got you particularly excited?
I actually went to see Lola Young like last month in Glasgow, and I love that song Messy, and I just thought her voice was amazing. It's just proper. I think her voice live was kind of stronger, more versatile than even it showed on record, and she had a good band. So that was really exciting to see. I was like, wow, because I know that, for instance, like, there's a question mark, and why are British acts or groups not making it in America anymore, and are we still producing them? But I think Lola Young's going to be a kind of a festival headliner at some point. She should be. I think she's got a strong and interesting voice, like the best one since Amy Winehouse maybe. And also I went to see an Irish singer called Orla Gartland, and I'd expected it to be quite introspective, and I hadn't heard much of her stuff, and then I went, and it was really, wow, it's like it was a party. She's in your face, and people were super into that. I thought she wrote some really, really good stuff.
Stuart, thank you so much for your time, and very much looking forward to those shows next year.
Thanks, Paul. It was a pleasure to chat to you. I think we went pretty deep today.
A big thanks to Stuart Murdoch from Belle and Sebastian. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. You can follow us on social media at Scared to Dance for news on our upcoming episodes, as well as our club night and film events. I'll be back next week talking to Asha Lorenz from the band Sorry about their new album Cosplay. This podcast was recorded and produced at Third Floor Recording.